Hey friends, welcome to Nina's Notes 161. Today we're going to talk about the power of boredom. And while boredom itself is not creative, what it can lead to after you're bored is very remarkable. 2 weeks ago, I got my screen time report from my iPhone and I saw that I spent 10 hours a week on Instagram. And I was really embarrassed. I was a bit appalled. And I thought I could be doing so much more with those 10 hours. Like I could start a company in 10 hours a week. And as I thought about what I wanted to replace Instagram with, my brain immediately went to replacing it with other highly productive tasks like language learning or more day-to-day work. But that's not what my brain wants. One of the many reasons my brain goes to Instagram is because it's a low cognitive load task. My brain wants to relax. And in those 10 hours a week, it craves something easy to do. And Instagram, of course, does more to our brain than just let it relax. It also keeps us hooked by spiking our dopamine and giving us that cheap dopamine. I wrote about it in Nina's Notes 153. I'll link it in the show notes. But then I thought, what if I replaced those 10 hours of Instagram with just being bored? And that led me to this week's note, the power of boredom. Let's dive into it. In the modern world, we're hyperconnected. We can talk to our friends in an instant. We can watch videos of friends and strangers on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. We can stay constantly engaged. But something crucial is missing from our lives now, and that is boredom. That uncomfortable, restless feeling of having nothing to do. The lethargy of simply wasting time with friends, where your brain has nothing to occupy it. We need to get bored. Arthur Brooks, the author of The Happiness Files, Insights on Work and Life, says, "You will have less meaning and you will be more depressed if you are never bored." And that statement struck me deeply. I remember when I was a kid, I'm an only child who spent a lot of time alone. I would run down the stairs to my parents and I would announce dramatically, "I'm bored." And they'd offer suggestions, read a book, play a game together, go outside. But often I would still be bored. Sometimes I needed help fighting the boredom. Other times I'd create things myself. I'd turn to crafting or I'd invent a game to play on my own. Fortunately, depression is not a feeling that stands out in my childhood memories. As adults, we know the weight of depression and we can feel it more deeply. Brooks' statement really resonates because we're not bored enough as a society, and therefore we're chronically depressed instead. So what happens when you're bored? Boredom is the tendency for us to not be cognitively occupied. And even as I speak that sentence out loud, as I was writing that sentence in my newsletter, my brain has this urge to just relax. It craves this lack of cognitive occupation and stimulation. But when our brains aren't cognitively occupied, our brain switches over to the default mode network, the DMN, and we really don't like it. Humans dislike boredom so much that we'd rather endure pain. And Dan Gilbert, an Edgar Pierce professor of psychology at Harvard, even put this to the test. He asked people to sit in a room for 15 minutes with instructions to do absolutely nothing. There was nothing to do in the room, except there was a button in front of them that they could push. If they pushed the button, they gave themselves a painful electric shock. You had a choice: sit there bored or get a shock. A large majority of participants chose to give themselves a shock instead of doing and thinking about nothing. This experiment went completely viral in 2014, with the Boston Globe publishing the epic clickbait title, "People Prefer Electric Shocks to Time Alone with Their Thoughts." Why do we avoid boredom then? We hate boredom because when our default mode network switches on, it leads us to thinking about uncomfortable things. The brain starts to wander and ask big questions like, what am I doing with my life? And what does my life mean? While those questions are uncomfortable because we may not have the answers, they're incredibly important questions to sit with. One of the reasons we've had such an explosion of depression and anxiety today is because people don't know the meaning of their lives. Most of the population isn't even looking for meaning. That's because we've accidentally engineered boredom out of our lives, and that's a massive problem. The modern day version of the electric shock is picking up our phones at the first sight of boredom. That 15-second wait at a traffic light, scroll. A quiet moment in line, check notifications. We've become so efficient at eliminating these micro moments of boredom that we've shut off our default mode network almost entirely. These uncomfortable mental wanderings aren't bugs. They're features. They're how we process life, find patterns, and discover meaning. When we constantly interrupt this process, we're essentially running a doom loop of meaning. Each time we choose distraction over reflection, it becomes harder to access that deeper sense of purpose. So I give you the boredom challenge. Tomorrow, when you go to the gym, don't take your phone. Can you handle it? I wrote about a 48-hour phone detox that I took in Nina's Notes 128. I'll drop it in the show notes. I had an incredible weekend. I highly, highly recommend putting your phone in the drawer for 48 hours. So continuing with the boredom challenge. Don't listen to a podcast while you're working out. Just be in your head. You could have the most interesting ideas while you're exercising without your devices. Here's an experiment to try this week. Commute with nothing. No podcast, no headphones, no radio. Start getting better at being bored for periods of 15 minutes or longer. What's going to change when you embrace boredom? You'll be less bored with ordinary things. You'll be less bored at your job, with your relationships, with the things going on around you. You'll start digging into the bigger questions about life, purpose, meaning, and significance. You will feel happier. So, how can you get bored more often? Set time away from your phone. For me, I put my phone away at 9 p.m. every night. I try not to pick it back up until 8 a.m. the next day. I don't sleep with my phone in the bedroom. Schedule regular screen cleanses. Spend longer periods away from your phone. This is the best way to remind yourself that your life doesn't revolve around this device. Schedule do nothing time. Resist the urge to distract yourself. Embrace the moment and see what thoughts or ideas arise. And you can use this time for reflection, to think about feelings or life rather than filling the void with external entertainment. And then be bored with friends. Have you ever invited someone over just to sit on your couch and do nothing? Try it. It's so nice to have a do nothing companion. You may worry that you're going to miss out on something, but the truth is you're killing yourself with hyperconnectivity. The news can wait. Your family and friends will understand if you don't get back to them immediately. Our grandparents didn't know what was happening constantly in the government and world news. According to a recent survey, 74% of Americans feel uneasy leaving their phones at home. 71% check their phones within the first 10 minutes of waking up, and 47% of Americans consider themselves addicted to their phones. So let's use boredom to fuel creative potential. By allowing your mind to wander, boredom can lead to innovative solutions and ideas. Speaking recently about her time during lockdown, a Booker Prize winning novelist, Anne Ernright, told of her delight at tooling around all day and suggested that having little to do can be a very good thing. Boredom is a productive state so long as you don't let it get sour on you, she said to The Guardian, adding, I wait for boredom to kick in because boredom for me is a good sign. According to Agatha Christie in a 1955 interview with the BBC, she said, there's nothing like boredom to make you write. With no formal education until she was 16, Christie said that by the time I was 16 or 17, I'd written quite a number of short stories and one long, dreary novel. Neil Gaiman's advice, you have to let yourself get so bored that your mind has nothing better to do than tell itself a story. The late David Foster Wallace was so fascinated by boredom that he based a novel on it. He set the posthumously published The Pale King in a tax office, and in a note found with the unfinished manuscript, explained his reasoning. It turns out that bliss, a second-by-second joy and gratitude at the gift of being alive and conscious, lies on the other side of crushing boredom. Kate Nash credits boredom to her success as a musician. She explained in a Rolling Stone feature that the boredom she experienced as a teenager led her to start writing music. I wrote a lot because there wasn't much else going on in my life. Later, when her friends were off at university and she was stuck at home working in a clothes shop, a lack of things to do spurred on her again. There was a lot of sighing and staring out of windows. Again, boredom became a great motivator. I started writing songs again. I posted them on MySpace and very quickly and unexpectedly became a pop star with a #1 record. While boredom itself is not creative, what it leads to can be remarkable. We often think that doing nothing means we literally have to do nothing and sit and stare at the wall. But as Rebecca Solnit writes in her book, Wanderlust, A History of Walking, thinking is generally thought of as doing nothing in a production-oriented culture. And doing nothing is hard to do. It's best done by disguising it as doing something, and the something closest to doing nothing is walking. I dare you to try and get out of your head, put your phone down, and get bored this week. Tell me about your experience. I can't wait to hear your thoughts and what ideas you had. Do you want to go beyond the YouTube channel, beyond my newsletter, beyond Nina's Notes? I mentor founders and ambitious professionals who want to build resilient minds and companies using evidence-based tools from neuroscience and longevity science. You can head over to my website, www.ninapatrick.xyz, to learn more about private mentorship and group sessions. The book of the week. This week, I read Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara, 5 out of 5 stars. This book was such a pleasure to read, such a surprise to read. Will tells the story of of his time as the general manager of 11 Madison Park between 2006 and 2012. During that time, he and his kitchen and floor team transformed EMP into a 3-star Michelin restaurant. His passion is on hospitality and how to have people not only have a fantastic meal, but remember the feelings and comfort they had from the moment they walked in to when they make it home. Will found ways to go above and beyond at EMP and really wow his customers. An example of unreasonable hospitality that stood out to me from the book was Will noticed that sometimes during dinner, a guest would go out to add quarters to their parking meter, and this would interrupt their meal. So when guests arrived at EMP, the maitre d' would ask if they came by car or taxi. If they came by car, the staff would ask where they were parked and would tell the guests that they would keep an eye on their parking meter so guests could relax and enjoy their meal. For the cost of just a few quarters, guests would be wowed, amazed, and come back again. These small acts of going above and beyond leave a lasting impression. Another example I loved is that instead of giving guests a coat check ticket, they would organize the coats by table and remember themselves. Then, when the guests were ready to leave, staff would have their coats waiting for them at the door. No more shuffling in your pockets and worrying about holding on to a small piece of paper or token. They even Googled guests' names when they made a reservation so they knew what they looked like when they arrived at the door with their reservation, and then they could be greeted by name. Ghidara even created a team of what he called dream weavers that would listen to his guests' conversations and then create an experience for the guests that they wouldn't have anywhere else. For example, one floor captain overheard an out-of-town regular regretting that he hadn't gotten his daughter a stuffed animal as he promised. So their dream weaver fashioned a perfect teddy bear for him out of kitchen towels. One night, a banker was lamenting about a fundraise for a company and told his waiter that an after-dinner drink would be great, but what he really needed was $1 million to finish the raise. Since the EMP team didn't have that budget, he filled a bag with 10 100-gram chocolate bars and tucked it under his chair. Ghidara showed his team how to be careful listeners and then let them run wild with their personal creative execution to create an impressive show of unreasonable hospitality. This was a really fun book to read and really inspiring about how anyone in any industry can bring unreasonable hospitality into their office, company, or event. This was a reader recommendation by Edward. Thanks, Edward. Check this out. Researchers from Penn State have developed a proof of concept at-home test to detect endometriosis in 10 minutes using period blood. The device is similar to a pregnancy test, showing 2 lines if the biomarker is detected in the sample. Penn State professor Dipanjan Pan said that the blood and tissue shed from the uterus each month is often overlooked as medical waste and even stigmatized by some, when in fact, menstrual blood is filled with biomarkers which could be used to enable earlier and more accessible detection of endometriosis and other diseases like HPV. You can see Nina's Notes 143, where I featured Women X Biotech, who's developed Pad X, an HPV test from a regular sanitary pad with a built-in test strip that collects cervical cells from menstrual blood. The researchers at Penn State developed a new technology to enable detection of HMGB1 protein, a protein implicated in endometriosis development and progression, in menstrual blood with 500% more sensitivity than existing laboratory approaches. They were able to create a test with such significant improvements in sensitivity due to a novel technique to synthesize nanosheets made of the atomically thin 2D material borophene, which they published in July 17, 2025 in ACS Central Science. The discovery of the nanosheet material was featured on the cover of the journal that month. Existing diagnostics for endometriosis involve extensive intravenous blood tests and imaging studied over several years. One study of 218 women showed that diagnosis of endometriosis could take up to 12 years in the United States. The team plans to scale up their approach for clinical studies and expand the technology to test for other biomarkers such as HPV and cervical cancer. This new test is a huge advancement for women's health, allowing for early detection and intervention of endometriosis that could spare countless women from invasive procedures. Measuring biomarkers from menstrual blood enables discreet and convenient monitoring, only requiring women to see a doctor when levels are detected, rather than for screening purposes only. That's it for today. For bonus content and deep dives, head over to my newsletter at www.ninasnotes.xyz. Catch me on YouTube, catch me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you love this, click that share button and send it to a friend who's curious about living better and longer. I'll see you next week.